everyone, welcome back to our another episode of Global Interviews. This is Starla here, and today I'm delighted to have Serhat come to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Okay, so for the first question, let's go just a simple one. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how did you start the journey with blockchain?
Sure, happy to. So I define myself as an engineer turned investor and a curious learner. I think for the latter, we will get to talk about it in the context of my podcast. But for the former, obviously there is a huge gap between, the engineer, which I started my, professional career in, if you start from undergrad studies, and, the investor bit, which I'm doing right now. So I studied in Turkey. After graduation from uni, I worked for a startup. I joined them as employee number 5. It was a startup backed by corporate. And they were operating in renewables business in Turkey. So that was a fascinating experience, as you can imagine. So I was doing something different every day, learning, practicing, and moving on. So that cycle of that sort of constant execution was what I did for around 4 years. And that I guess stayed with me later in my career, which all the way led to perhaps my curious learner's journey, which I'm happy to talk about as well. But after doing that startup experience for 4 years, when things started to become a bit more repetitive, I decided to move on. And next up, what I wanted to do was study MBA. And the reason was that although I did a lot of finance-related assignments and projects at the startup, I was trading electricity, I was investing in greenfield projects, etc. But the finance angle was missing because I studied engineering, so there was no proper finance education. And I picked Columbia Business School in New York among my other options because it was such a strong finance school. I did that for 2 years, and after that I moved to London. So this was around 9 years ago. I joined Goldman Sachs because I thought that that's the best place to practice, learn finance. And I was actually right. I stayed there for around 5 years, and I was so much impressed every day with the collective intellect of people there, and also the very strong institutional brand that Goldman has. And I obviously still remember those days quite nice. After that Goldman experience, where I did investment banking, and the industry that I was operating in was again electricity and energy business, which was in line with my experience at the startup in Turkey. But after Goldman, I decided to move into investing side of things. And given I did startup, I was very much into technology businesses and early stage businesses, and I moved into VC industry. So this was around 4 years ago. I joined a group of ex-bankers, I joined a group of ex-bankers who had founded an investment firm called Centricus in London. So we did work on a wide variety of projects there, including early stage opportunities, but also late stage. The strategy was a little bit opportunistic, so to say. I did that for 2 years, and after that I met Hanzade Doğan. I joined forces with Hanzade Doğan, who I knew from Columbia Business School network. She is one of the leading entrepreneurs from Turkey. She's actually one of the first who built a sizable business in Turkey. She's the founder of a Nasdaq-listed e-commerce platform called Hepsiburada. It's like an Amazon-type marketplace business. They did an IPO last year. But we started D4 Ventures, where I am right now, around 2 years ago as an early stage investing platform. And we invest in 2 areas at D4. One is transformational financial services, and the other one is future of commerce. And if you think about the former, when we set the thesis as transformational financial services, what is going on in financial services right now is very much enabled by blockchain, right? We see a lot of breakthrough technologies and new projects coming up on that sort of spectrum. I'm happy to talk about sort of how we see the space in terms of the transformation, what are the sort of, different angles of it, and what's the extent of it as to the impact in the broader society. But those are the things that we care about at D4 as well, and I do care at the personal level too. So that's my background and how I met blockchain.
That's amazing. So you base your work experience. You are primarily an investor, and you have extensive experience working in investments, and then you also enter the crypto industry. So I would like to ask you about, do you see any similarities and differences between crypto investment and traditional investment?
Sure, absolutely. So obviously as an investor, my job is to assess the attractiveness of any investment opportunity, regardless of its sector, state, geography, whatever. And if you think about the playbook as to how you can do that, it's pretty much standard across different things. You would need to look at obviously the market potential, the project team, and how big it could be, whether that team could execute such an opportunity to achieve a substantial return potential for the investors, etc., etc. And if you think about it, there is obviously a long list of sort of due diligence checklist and all that. But if you take a step back before going into that, between crypto industry and traditional industry, again, so they are at the end of the day investment opportunities. But as a starting point, what matters in crypto is obviously first and foremost is the structure of investing, right? So you typically invest in tokens or in a combination of token and equity in crypto, which is obviously different, which is a stark difference, I guess. But at the end of the day, in my mind, it is the sort of mechanics bit, right? So once you do it once, doing it the second time and so on is relatively easy. But I think what matters more and which is the more interesting bit, is more on the assessment side of the opportunity, right? So crypto businesses obviously behave differently in terms of all the way from product market fit in the very early stages to scaling, right? So obviously crypto industry is relatively new. We all say this is very early days, we are in it for the long term, etc. But it's hard to obviously visualize what is the long-term potential of any particular business in crypto, because what you can benefit from in traditional businesses is you can always draw from your experience or someone else's experience in precedents, right? A particular type of business, let's say a fintech payment business, right? Or lending business, e-commerce marketplace. So you can see examples from the past as to how they developed in the early days, how they hit scaling phase, how they executed successfully or not successfully that scaling phase, and how they were able to execute the market potential to its full extent. But obviously since crypto, this cycle has not been necessarily completed for a lot of different businesses. So that's sort of the challenging bit from the perspective of conducting due diligence in crypto investments. But otherwise, in the early days, which we can sort of obviously see a lot of sort of stories around how crypto projects achieve product market fit, how some of them manage to grow exponentially in a very short period of time. Obviously, we probably have enough data points there. And some of it is obviously driven by these crypto maximalists, power users, degens, whatever, which drive up the volume, the traffic, the engagement in all these projects. So that's sort of relatively easy to assess if a project will achieve that sort of early stage growth. Though it is sometimes it's between traditional investments and crypto investments, sometimes it's easier almost to achieve that early product market fit in crypto, because there is a lot of demand, and these crypto projects, as you guys all know very well, they offer a lot of rewards, benefits to those early adopters in the form of airdrops earlier days, or sort of obviously when you do participate in these lending borrowing pools, you get rewarded with tokens, etc., etc. So you're almost incentivized from a user perspective to participate in the very early days of these projects, and that's almost the whole point of crypto, isn't it? So sort of involving everyone to the degree of rewarding them for being part of the, story, for being part of building the project. So though there is one caveat to which I guess is interesting to look at. So sometimes from a user experience perspective, it's almost too easy to onboard users and sort of them starting engaging with your project. And it sometimes creates this problem of loyalty, right? Or sort of lack of loyalty. Because it's so easy from when you connect your wallet, on a protocol, it is almost, too easy to jump from that protocol to another one, or from one wallet to another wallet. So this is actually something that I was discussing with fellow investors, that sort of does crypto, these projects have a loyalty problem? As in sort of, it's hard for them to keep retaining their users unless obviously they keep offering them rewards or benefits, whatever. So from that perspective, I guess traditional and crypto in the early stages in particular, there seems to be a bit of difference, as in sort of some crypto projects can achieve product market fit almost too fast, almost too easily, but then that creates this misconception of, okay, so is this a true signal for the long term, or is this sort of a false one, which is again intensified by certain, rewards, benefits, or other sort of things that are offered by the projects to their users. So there I'm trying to be careful as to whether whether it's something that would go for the long term or not. But otherwise, if you take a step back again, the overall sort of DD checklist, so to say, is pretty much similar, but the long-term bit is missing in crypto since we haven't seen that cycle, right? So, and now, given the changing macroeconomic conditions, as you know as well, so it's a bit hard to see whether the setback that we are going through right now will take a year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. So that will obviously, be an important factor for investors, for us to formulate long-term views on the crypto market. How big is it, and how much does a particular project can sort of how to what extent can a particular project achieve that sort of scaling in a market like that. So those are the questions. Those are the interesting questions right now. But it is again hard to see.
Do you think your investment experience in the blockchain industry has helped you in any way?
I think it helps me on a daily basis to become a better learner, almost, because in crypto, as you know, when you go and look at a new project, the team is kind enough to put together all these, white papers, light papers, and sort of the background to the projects as to how they think about things, etc. So it's always, for me as a curious learner as well, fascinating to read through them and understand all these new concepts. Although sometimes it makes me nervous as well, because I go to bed reading some new stuff on my iPad or on paper or whatever, but then when I wake up in the morning, there is this new concept again, which I have no idea about. I have to now look into it and read through it, learn about it as well, before I even sort of consider whether it is a big enough space, the right sort of risk return potential from an investment perspective, etc. So in crypto, there is this constant cycle of looking at new things, learning about them, and then trying to come up with a mental model on your end as to whether that's a good investment opportunity or not. Otherwise, all of these things are interesting to the point of their great learning opportunities, and I sometimes put myself too much into that sort of rabbit hole, as people call it. But it's not, a good learning opportunity of a new concept is not necessarily a good investment opportunity. So that's sort of the thing that I personally need to sort of make a better distinction of. But otherwise, yes. So this the industry and my investment experience in the industry helps me with sort of broadening my perspective as to the degree of as I briefly discussed in the beginning, that sort of spectrum of transformation of financial services, right? And obviously we now speak about the impact of blockchain in financial services, where we invest in, or in e-commerce as well, which is another focus area for us, with those concepts and new sort of technologies that were introduced so far. But there is a lot of new concepts, new tool sets, new ideas being formulated by new teams. Yeah. So we have not, obviously, again, back to the point of we are so early in this, the technology phase. We are so early in the transformation of of blockchain in any other sector. So we haven't seen the impact of any of those new technologies, but we are all discovering, we are all exploring at the same time. So from that perspective, as an investor, so being able to see that in real time is a great opportunity, because in traditional investment, what you are playing with is almost, with technologies that were introduced some time ago, you play with, okay, how to now increase the efficiency of distribution, how to now increase the efficiency of, delivery of a particular product service to the end user. So it's almost, the marginal improvements here and there that you have to sort of see and invest in. But in blockchain, it's massively different. So you are investing in this new white space with all these new concepts and technologies and ideas that were introduced to us. So as an investor, it's a massive opportunity. Actually, I enjoy being in the middle of all those discussions.
That's perfect. Okay, so let's talk about your podcast. So you launched your own podcast, The Curious Learners, in October last year. What made you mind to build your own podcast?
So it took me 8 years to do that. But no, the background is I've been a loyal podcast listener myself, and I'm happy to make a few suggestions if anyone is interested to hear that. But it was part of my daily commute. So when and even before when I moved to London as well, whenever I'm on a train or I'm on a run, walk, whatever. So I used to put on my headphones and listen to these podcasts. And in London as well, when I was going to work, either running, cycling, or sort of walking, it's sort of I follow this cycle, and these days it is cycling again. So I have my podcast on every day, and there is a lot of great content out there, right? You wouldn't get bored in that commute. So I've been doing that for 8-9 years, and finally I decided to do one myself. So that was one sort of driver. But the other big driver is that, so as part of my job, I speak to all these great founders, founding teams, investors, operators on a daily basis, right? I hear great stories about how they build things, how they scale up their businesses, how they think about investing, how they run teams, how they build teams and everything. But those discussions are mostly one-to-ones. The great takeaways from those discussions stay limited to those two parties or a few parties in that conversation. So they never make their way, out of that circle. However, if you think about it, there are, a lot of people out there who would massively benefit from just hearing about those conversations. And I felt, it's in fact a responsibility that I have to make it more public to the outside world, all these conversations with these great people, sort of someone maybe who wants to build something but never knew where to start, or who is in the early phase of building a team, building a project, but doesn't know how to scale up that particular business, how to approach team building and all that. So I thought if I sort of speak to these people in a podcast setting, which I love anyways, and then I make it, I put it out there to the public for people, anyone who could use a bit of inspiration from just listening to this content, I would feel very happy. And that's sort of the other spirit that I had. And the third thing is that it's the name and it's the logo as well, which I guess I have to talk about my son here. So he's 4-year-old now. He's a curious little boy, like any other kid at his age. He asks questions, follow-ups up until the point where he feels satisfied with the answer that you give to him. And that's another inspiration that I had starting the podcast, and that's why the name is The Curious Learners. And if you look at the logo as well, there is a car, and there are books on the logo, which are the two things that he loves, and also the colors are his two favorite colors on the logo. So that's the other thing I wanted to do. When he grows up a little bit more, perhaps he might want to listen to an episode or two, and he can, just for him to see something that I produced. So that was the other sort of spirit behind it.
Oh, that's lovely. Does he listen to your podcast?
Oh, I talked to him about that, and in fact, I have this project to record an episode with him. I'm planning to do it after he starts school this September. Once he has some, experience in this new environment, I'm planning to have a podcast with him about that. So I'm looking forward to that.
If you were to recommend crypto-related episodes to our audience who have not yet listened to your podcast, and which guest interview would you recommend and why?
No, look, it's obviously hard to pick any single episode because each of them, is special. My guests make the time out of their busy schedule for these podcasts, and they make the time, they participate, and it's a lot of fun. I hope for them too. So it's hard, but I guess what I can say to that question is that when I started the Curious Learners, it wasn't in fact meant to be a crypto podcast. It is still not a crypto podcast, but I think, as a lot of people say, once you sort of go through the rabbit hole of crypto, as you learn through, new things, there's always this next thing that you want to read about, that you want to talk to people about, etc. And that's how sort of it's progressing for the Curious Learners so far. When I talk about, the origins of blockchain technology, which, by the way, I recorded that episode with Scott Stornetta, who is a legend in the blockchain industry. Actually, his works, he's a cryptography expert. His and his co-authors' works have been referenced in the original Bitcoin white paper, and I think there are eight references in the original white paper. 3 or 4 of them are actually works published by Scott Stornetta and his business partner. So I had that episode where we talked about the genesis of blockchain, how it emerged, what's the idea behind it, almost 30 years ago. So when you talk about that, and then the next thing you want to sort of explore is, let's say, DeFi, right? So what does it mean? What does it impact? What's the transformational power of it? And the next thing then, NFT space. And all these things sort of follow one another. And then since, I guess, almost 4th, 5th episode of the Curious Learners, we are now on 28th, I guess. It's been mostly crypto focused. And in terms of sort of the depth of the discussion, obviously, I try to do a lot of work beforehand. I also want, obviously, my guests to enjoy the episode, to find it interesting for them. So a few deep dives recently were interesting. If I can maybe exemplify from the recent past, for example, this one's with Scott Stornetta, where we explored the origins of blockchain, was quite interesting. Another one with Munir Ben Shemlet, who is the founder of Paraswap, a DEX aggregator, was again interesting. We very much went deep into the sort of customer behavior in trading cryptocurrencies and the share of aggregators versus primary trading channels, etc. And very recently I had an episode with Will Robinson, who is the head of community at Alliance, which is one of the leading Web3 accelerators. So it was a great, I think, content from the perspective of encouraging all these great founders, great projects out there to participate, in these accelerators and get the benefits offered to them by those, platforms. But there is again a lot of, I think, those who I can mention. I think if we were to go through each and every episode one by one, I would be equally excited to talk about them. But that's sort of how I, maybe just to finish it off, that's how I try to approach this. I try to speak to people from different corners of crypto, so that I get to sort of research all these new things or things that I'm interested in to talk about, but also for listeners to sort of understand, the big puzzle of maybe crypto with these different sort of pieces of it. So that's sort of my goal since a few months with the Curious Learners, and I try to pick my guests accordingly.
Do you think some of the significant elements to build a good channel podcast?
So look, there are millions of podcasts out there, I guess.
But you made a good one. You can share your experience.
Thank you. So there are millions of podcasts out there. It is hard to obviously talk to how to build a good podcast yet, because I'm relatively new. So it's been only 8-9 months for me. Unless I guess you are your project or you yourself are a big hit, big celebrity, I feel like you have to pick your lane. And that's what I try to do with the Curious Learners. I picked this theme of making this information possessed by these great individuals, making it available to people out there. So that was the overarching theme. But then with crypto, again, so I picked it as a subject where people, I presume, are interested to learn more about, to listen to this good content wherever they can find it, etc. So I guess to build a path for someone who wants to build a podcast channel, it's important to pick that lane, pick that subject, whatever that might be, and now focus on that in a genuine way, because that sort of genuine approach clearly goes a long way. When you talk to your sort of when you talk to people that you want to have on the podcast, if obviously when they see that you have this genuine interest in that particular field, they want to participate, right? And in my case, obviously it's relatively easy because I talk to these people as part of my day job as an investor in crypto or in fintech, e-commerce, etc. So when it's my sort of daily conversation with these people, and at some point I can then say, okay, actually, you want to come to my podcast? We can talk about this and that. So that relationship helps a lot. But also when I speak to someone that I don't know yet, if I tell them, look, I'm an investor in crypto, I invested in this and that project, this is my previous podcast, this is this is the article that I wrote on this particular sort of subject in crypto, whatever, it helps a lot, because then they see that you are genuine about the subject, and you also, as the owner of the podcast, you also care about this thing. And also when I explain to them all the spirit behind it, a lot of people, I'm lucky, a lot of people like that spirit, and they want to be a participant. So that's how I approach it. But in terms of, obviously, the big part of this is choosing the subject and sort of reaching out to your potential guests, building out that relationship is important. But there's a huge effort, obviously, that needs to be put forward in terms of marketing and promoting the podcast. To be honest, I'm not doing a great job on that front yet, because there's only a very limited sort of set of activities that I do. I put it on my LinkedIn profile, I put it on my Twitter profile, but I don't do much other than those things. And obviously, so far it stays limited to my existing, professional network, so to say, unless people are sharing it in their own networks. I'm hoping they do. But yeah, that's, I guess, the other huge element of building a good podcast, making it sort of, putting it out there for anyone and everyone to be able to discover it. Obviously, there is all these, technical tools where you put it in all these directories, and anyone who listens to podcasts on their sort of selected podcast platforms, they can discover it. But still, you need to put a lot of effort in order to, I guess, solicit, feedback, reviews, perhaps ask people to subscribe for the podcast, obviously in a way, to incentivize them and all that. So I need to spend more time on that front, which, to be honest, I wasn't able to do as much as I wanted to do.
That's amazing. Okay, so what type of people you would like to interview in the future?
So I think it's gonna be it's gonna continue to be the same way I have been doing so far. So it is sort of in my own time, when I read about new things just to learn about them, or when I do a deep dive research in a particular field for investing purposes, I come across these great people right? I reach out to them. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. But the whole spirit of, allowing the people who listen to the curious learners to learn about new things which could be important in their daily lives, which could be important for the future of this space that we are working in, financial services, etc. So I will continue to do it the same way I was doing, and it will be, I will try to do it all, I will try to do it with all these new concepts emerging in blockchain, in crypto, but it doesn't have to be in crypto. I will actually have someone very soon who is building a company in an area which is totally different from crypto. It will be very soon, and I'm excited for that session already. But yeah, the whole spirit will remain there, sort of making that sort of great stories, the new breakthrough technologies, breakthrough concepts accessible to anyone and everyone who could find an inspiration, however small it is. In those sessions, I will try to build the lineup of guests with that spirit.
The final questions, but not least, any future vision and mission of the Curious Learners?
Well, no particular agenda really on my end. So I don't know where it would go. So it started as a passion project. So something I would love to do, and I really enjoy doing it so far. It gives me a great opportunity, to talk to great people. I try to do it on a weekly basis. Sometimes it slips, but and making that content again accessible to everyone. I feel like I'm on a great sort of mission already, which is going well from my perspective. Obviously, I'll be happier as the Curious Learners expands its outreach by, if you can measure obviously by number of downloads and all that. I'm following that at the back end too. But I don't know where it goes. I think I will continue to do it as I enjoy it really very much. So, but no future plans really.
Just follow your heart.
Absolutely.
Go with the flow.
Absolutely, that's what I do. It's got no sort of business agenda behind it, to be honest. Because some people tell me things like, "Oh, okay, that must be creating a good deal flow for you." Since obviously I'm investing in crypto as a venture capitalist, but to be honest, I don't look at it that way. In fact, I try not to sort of do it. Even if there might be an opportunity, obviously I respond to those opportunities. If people come to me saying things like, "Okay, I saw your podcast episode with this person. It was great and all that. So by the way, we are doing fundraising for our project, etc." So obviously I respond to those messages. But it's part of my day job anyway. So because deal flow sourcing happens through a lot of different channels, and this could be one of them. But I'm just sort of trying to make it clear that that's not the reason by any means why I started the Curious Learners, and I'm not trying to use it as a deal flow channel.
Thank you guys for watching today's episode. If you like the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you, Serhat, for coming to our podcast.
Thank you, Starlight. It was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I really enjoyed talking to you as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.